Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. And in this video what I want to do is do JavaScript events masterclass. Basically everything you'd ever want to know about events. Not everything, but basically by the end of this video you should be an expert in the idea of events, event-driven programming as applied in JavaScript. But event-driven programming doesn't exist just in JavaScript. It's a very typical pattern, and the idea is just that something happens, and you have functions that are queued up to run when that thing happens. Okay? Now, what we're going to do is first we're going to go over browser events, then we'll go over node events, and then I'll show you just kind of how to build like the whole event pattern from scratch. So that way, once you see how it works, we'll build it out so that way you can kind of see how it's working under the hood. Okay, so we'll just do it step by step. I also have blog articles and previous videos I've done on the subject. But let's start with browser events. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an index.html and put some HTML boilerplate. Okay, I'm going to put a button that says cheese on it. You guys know the drill. Okay, and then we'll do a script tag so I can write some JavaScript right here in the file. So that way I don't have to attach a separate JavaScript file. Okay. So an event occurs, like the browser has a lot of different built-in events. Okay, like you can actually have events happen when people copy and paste. Events happen when people. I think you can actually even hook up like a game joystick and take input from a game joystick. There's a browser API for that. You know, if you go do some research into different browser APIs built into the different browsers, it's pretty extensive. Like, you could literally spend the rest of your life just learning all these APIs. Okay, but let's just build the simplest of events. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to save the button in a variable. So I'm going to create a variable called button equals, okay, and I'm going to save the button by querying it. So I'm going to say query selector, and again what query selector does, and I got to do an uppercase S in there. What it does is I say, hey, get me the first element you can find that matches the HTML element button. So there's only one button on the screen, so it's going to get me that button. Okay, so this is going to find that element that matches my search and saves it in this variable. That's essentially what I'm doing. Okay, so now that I have the button stored in this variable, that button has all sorts of things going on. Like I can do all sorts of functions, and I would recommend watching my previous DOM video that I released like a week or so ago on that topic to kind of learn more about what you can do with that. But all I care about right now is button.addEventListener. Okay, so now what happens here when I say button.addEventListener, what I'm saying is that I want to add an event listener. And essentially the way it works is that the browser has all these different types of events that it can emit. And you can have different elements listen to that event being emitted from themselves, okay? Or by an ancestor. We'll get into bubbling. Okay, so add event listener. Okay, so if I say the button is going to have an event, we're going to say this listener gets triggered whenever someone clicks on the button. Okay, whenever someone clicks on the button. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm also going to do a console.dir here of the button, and you'll see why in a second. Okay, and then we're going to have a function that's going to console log clicked. Okay, so we can see that we clicked the button. Okay, that's it. So let me open this up with live server. So open with live server. Okay, let's close that. Where did did it not open? It didn't open here. So let me close all this. Ah, there it is. Okay. So let's open up the terminal. So Control-Shift-I to open up the dev load. Now that first console log, the console.dir of the button is here. And the reason why I did console.dir, D-I-R, It's because instead of just logging like the button and just seeing like, hey, there's a button tag, it'll actually log all the properties of the button. So remember I mentioned there's a lot of different events you can listen for. Each possible event that the button can listen for is actually a property on it. So you can actually see them here. See on abort, on animation end, on anything with the word on in front of it is a potential event you can listen for. And there's a lot of them. Okay, so you can have a lot of fun with this. And there's a lot of other cool properties. So never a bad time to kind of spend time in looking at your DOM elements properties. Okay, now watch what happens when I click the button. Cheese, or clicked, right? He said, hey, if I click it, then it logs. So notice I didn't log until I clicked the button. So it responded to the click event. That function ran when I clicked the button. Now here's the thing. The event, the function that I run, might be dependent on what's going on in the browser. Like, hey, did I hold down the Alt key? Did I hold down the Shift key? What is the exact position on the screen that I clicked on? All these things may affect how the function plays out. So how am I supposed to get that information? Well, what happens is that the browser, so this only is relevant to front-end browser run events, that it generates this object full of a bunch of data about what just happened, called the event object. And we can receive that event object. So I can sit there and all you do is that in your this is referred to as your handler function. So the function that runs in response to the event is oftentimes referred to as your event handler. And at the end of the day, like, the word handler just really is any function that happens in response to something. Like, that's the convention with the name. So this function can receive the event object. It doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it E. I like to call it event, so that way it's clear. Let's console log the event now. Okay. And so now, when I click on this button, instead of logging clicked, it'll log the event. Because again, the function will always receive the event, and then I can do whatever I want with the event. So let's try this again. And see, I get a pointer event. So there's different categories of events. So this is a pointer event because it occurred because of the mouse. Okay, and there's different types of pointer events. But it's going to give me information relative to this type of event. So see, like Alt key false. That means I was not holding the Alt key. So now I'm going to use this finger here, and I'm going to push down on the Alt key and click it again. So let me close that one up, open this one up, and then you can see this time Alt key is true. There's the same thing for like Shift key, all sorts of other cool stuff you can do. So like bubbling, we'll talk about it in a bit, as I mentioned before. Again, whether the Control key is held down, we'll talk about the current target thing in a bit. You know, like movement, layer. I'm not sure quite exactly what these things are measuring. I know they're measuring like position on the screen, but each one has a slightly different connotation. There's that, and there's this path thing, and then these are the elements. So like this case, like there's this button. So this is like all the elements that got affected by the event. So I clicked on the button, but the button is inside the body tag, so the body could have heard the event. This is what's referred to as bubbling. Because what happens is that when you trigger an event, not only does that thing hear it, but anything above it. So if I had a click event on the body, it would also have been triggered by this event. Even though I clicked on the button, since the button is in the body would also hear the click. So basically that's what we refer to as bubbling. It starts with the thing, the target, and then bubbles up. Okay, so I can see exactly who's going to hear that bubble by here. So button would be what's referred to as the target. Let me go back to the target property. There's this current target property where there's current target, which is null. And then there's target, which is the thing that I clicked on. Target. There's the button. So this path array should always start with the button. Okay, there's the target. Then the thing that the target is in, and then the thing that is in, and the thing that is in, and the thing that is in. And again, there's always going to be the window because the window is the browser. Okay. So just to kind of show you show that at work. Okay, let's create another event. Now the window, I don't need to save the window. The window is something that exists automatically when you're doing front-end browser code. Okay, and I can add an event listener to the window. Event listener. And then we'll say it's also a click. And this one will also console.log, console.log, except I'm going to put a little preface here so we know it's the Windows log, window, and then we'll console log the event. And then this thing needs the event. You can tell I just woke up. And then here I'm going to do this as the button event. Okay. So now let's see here. Let's go back over here. Now watch what happens if I click anywhere other than the button. Okay, so see the window had an event. Okay, and if I look here, I can see if I look at path, basically HTML could hear it, document can hear it, and window can hear it. That's the path. Okay, that's pretty much as like minimal as it's going to get. Because technically I clicked, like if I go to target, see my target's the HTML, because this is the HTML document. This whole space over here. So even though the event listener is on the window, the document where I can click is inside the window. Okay, but if I go to current target, do we have a current target this time? Current target still null. Okay, we'll eventually get one of those. Cool. But again, I can still trigger the event. Now watch what happens when I click on the button. If I click on the button, see I get two events. Because even though I clicked on the button, okay, and as I mentioned before, we go to the path, the window is within the path of the button. So in that case, that click of the button bubbled up to the window, also triggering the Windows listener. And now I have the window listener. And if I look at this one, if I take a look at the target, see the target's the button, not the window. Because even though the Windows listener got triggered, the target always represents the thing that was like clicked on or the thing that caused the event, which may not necessarily be the thing listening for the event. Okay, and these are just kind of like nuances of, and again, I can see what type of event it is and a bunch of fun details there. But there's all sorts of different cool events you can do. Like there are keystroke events. So let's do browser key events, keyboard events. Okay. Guess something else, but let me just, maybe I can find what here we go. Let's just, like there's key up and there's key down. So key down is when you push down on the key up is when you let go of the key. So let's try that out. Okay, and for that, there's not really like a button on the screen, so in that case you generally you add the listener to the window. So I'm going to say that window dot add event listener, and then we're going to say here this is going to be on key down. Okay, and then we're going to say just do a console log of, and again this would also receive the event. I could get the event if I want. Console.log down, and then I can do, there's touch events, there's like so many different types of events. And the thing is that you have to keep in mind what kind of events. Like a pointer event with a mouse works on a desktop but doesn't work on like a touch screen mobile phone, because that's not considered a click, that's not considered a pointer, that's actually considered a touch. So there's a whole separate event. So oftentimes if you have something that you need to click on, you need to also create a touch event for it, so that way if someone's on a mobile phone they can still interact with it just the same. Like usually like pushing with your finger can register as a click event, but it can get a little iffy. So that's why there's touch events that are a little bit more clear for like mobile phones. So this will be on key up. Okay. Cool. Let's see here. Let's go back to the browser. Okay, so now I'm going to push down on Q and hold it. Oh, nope, that's in the, I was typing in the console. I'm going to be in the document. I'm going to hold down Q. And see, I push down, and see I'm triggering lots of down events. But then as soon as I lift up, I trigger an up event. And if I just push down real quickly, I triggered a down then an up event. Okay, so it just depends on like when you want to trigger an event. So in case you want people like to hold things, and I think sometimes like I think there's like details that'll track like duration, or you can track duration, and things like that from doing that. There's like events and but yeah, so there's lots of different types of events. Is my point. Okay, and then again, when you do that keyboard event, you can always just sit there and like check, hey, did they hold Alt or did they hold Shift? So you can create like shortcuts for your website, which is pretty cool. That's how you see like things like Google Sheets, how they can almost make something that feels like using Excel in the browser, because they can use keyboard events to create all those keyboard shortcuts that do all those things you're used to doing in desktop software. Okay, cool. So I think you guys get the idea of like how browser events work and how you can use them. Bottom line is, you put a listener on something, you say, hey, what you want to respond to, then a function to run in response to that thing. That's the extent of it. Doesn't get any more complicated than that. Now, when it starts getting a little complicated is if you want custom events. And there's two ways to do this. Okay, so let's do this. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to say that we'll say const, we'll call it superclick. Just make up a event equals, and then we'd say new event. Okay, and then we would just give it a name. Superclick. That's going to be the name of it. Okay, simple as that. So now you can listen for this event because it exists. Okay. So now what I can do is I can say something like this. I can be like one. Well, let me save the button again. Const button equals document dot query selector button. So I'm going to grab the button again, and I am going to first off say that the button can respond const or no, button dot add event listener, and it's going to listen for superclick, and then we'll just say console.log superclick. Okay, and then we're going to do is we're going to say button. We're going to add another event listener because we need to trigger this event somehow. Add event listener, so we're going to trigger it on click. And what this function is going to do is just going to do superclick dot emit. I think it's actually a init event. Okay, let me just double check. I have a blog post on this. I don't really use this method as much. So let's see, Control F events. Yeah, you do this long enough, you start forgetting more than you know. Let's see here. Okay, so here we go. Nope, not there. Not there. That's just the basics. So then here's again the custom events. We created the new custom event, superclick per se. And it's dispatch event. Okay, so let's see here. Teddy bear photo. Okay. Okay, I got it. Cool. So really what we want to do is do button dot dispatch event. And what this does, it just says, hey, dispatch the event as this thing is a target. Because that's technically what's happening. When you click on the button is running the dispatch event function from its context and saying dispatch event click. So I'm just doing superclick. Okay, and I forget, do I use, yeah, I have to use the object. So I would just dispatch the event and use superclick as a type of event I'm dispatching. So now anything that's listening to it can listen to it. So essentially what's going to happen is I'm going to click the button. That's going to trigger a click event. The function that gets triggered by the click event dispatches another event called superclick, and then this listener should respond to that. And the point of this is you can create your own custom events. Like, it doesn't have to be this contrived, but you could theoretically make events that only happen in particular situations, and you want to make sure that, hey, I want to make sure that you can only listen to it when in these particular situations. So you create a custom event. So let's try it out. Okay, so I should click the button and see I get superclick. Okay, and that console log of superclick would only work if the superclick event was dispatched. Now, if I go back over here, and let's console log the event as well. So we'll console log the event from superclick. Let's see what we see. Okay, so I click on that event. See, it says event type superclick. Okay, and if I take a look at for target, the target's the button. Okay, then the path, again path, and that's why it's important that you do button.dispatch event, because that's going to determine sort of who the target is. The target's whoever invoked the function, and then it determines the path from that. So that's kind of like how it works per se. So again, so if you were to imagine sort of the steps, if I were recreating this, what would happen is that essentially each DOM element has event listeners that are listening for a particular event. Okay, so a function, they actually literally do have a property that's called like as you saw it earlier, it's like on this, on that. That's actually a variable that has a function, that can have a function to listen for a particular event. So then what happens when the event gets dispatched, first it goes to the target and sees, is there a function in that property? Okay, then it's going to go up the path and see if any of those other things have a function for that property, and if they do, it dispatches the event. And that's sort of the mechanics of bubbling. So like the way the browser events work, it's a little bit more complicated than what I'll show you later on, but it's pretty neat. And some of that just clicked right now. That's the beauty of teaching. Like when you teach something, the things start clicking a little bit more every time you do it. Okay, like the role, like now, like I knew what bubbling was, but now the mechanics of bubbling are like super clear. Again, the target is the thing that's actually running the dispatch event function under the hood, and then it's just checking to see if that property on the DOM node, every level of the path, exists. So that's neat. Okay, there's one other way you can build a custom event, so let's do that. Okay, with just a slight difference. So the difference would be, instead of event, it would be custom event. Okay, generally the same idea. I'll just go make sure that the first part is the same. Okay, and then here's where it gets different. Like you can do a second argument with a object called detail. Okay, and the idea is that the details, like if there's some sort of piece of information you want to ship with this event, because you want anything that gets this event to be able to listen to this piece of information, then you would put it in there. So for example, let's see here, superclick. Again, the second argument, we would say detail, and we'll say detail equals Gouda. Okay, so that's essentially the same, and all of this all still is the same, except now when I console log the event, you're going to notice something a little bit different. So let's go back over here, and I click on cheese, and if I do custom event and I look inside, look, there's the detail property with Gouda. Okay, so I was able to deliver data with additional details that may have not been built into the browser through the event. So that's the point of like that detail object. It's like, okay, hey, and and the cool thing is you could pass an object. Okay, and again, objects are passed by reference, so changes made in other places would be reflected in the object. So there's different ways you can do this that make it kind of dynamic and cool. Like if you had an object called state. Okay, let's like just do that as an example. Let's say I create an object called state, so const state equals an object. Okay, so right now that object is empty, and if I go to detail, I'll say, hey, detail is going to equal state. Okay, but then let's say during the click event, so let's put some curly brackets around the click event. Why? Okay, during the click event, but I'm also going to add an extra line that says state.cheese equals Gouda. Okay, so the idea is I'm not changing detail. What I'm now doing is I'm changing this object called state, but detail's passing the object of state in there. I'm altering it before the superclick event happens, so let's see what happens. Okay, and I go in there, there's detail, and if I go into detail, see cheese Gouda's in there. So the cool thing about like passing an object as detail is that if other things alter that object, because again objects and arrays are passed by reference, you'd be able to see those changes. Like it's, if you were the like, that's the beauty of like objects, also one way of transmitting data, that you can have the changes to that object occur elsewhere in the app. But of course, if you cause too many changes to too many things all over the place, it can get a little disorganized and hard to follow. So be careful with that. But again, it's another mechanism at your disposal if it's the best solution for the particular challenge at hand. Okay, so that's browser events. So now we've learned again how browser events work, and all that fun jazz. Okay, so now let's go to Node. Okay, so Node, there's some built-in events. None that I can think of that are like really simple ones to show you, because like usually the ones that are built in are like streams, and streams are a whole other topic that deserve their own video. Okay, so index.js. Okay, but there is an object for creating your own custom events. And the way like events work in Node is a little bit different. Instead of having sort of an event that gets dispatched, and then you're checking to see if a property exists on each node in a node tree, because again, in Node, there is no browser. There's just like the shell environment. Because Node exists within your operating system's shell. That's where it's the context in which it's running on. It's running on your computer, not in the browser. So what it does is that you have an event emitter object, and you can register events to it. Okay, and I imagine that under the hood, it's saving all those listeners in an array. And then what happens when that event emitter emits an event, it will then go through that array and see if any of them have a matching event, and if there is, it runs the function that's with that listener. Okay, so two different event emitter objects can't communicate with each other. So usually you just have one in your app. If you were making one, usually what happens is that different libraries you use have an event emitter object built in, generating events that are related to their libraries. So if you ever use like Mongoose for connecting to a Mongo database, you see like you can have an event happen when the connection opens, when the connection closes, because they created a custom event emitter object that's actually the property called mongoose.connection. Let's just create a custom event to kind of make this a little bit clearer. Okay, so in that case, we would want to import event emitter from Node. So we const equals, so again, we have to import it because we're in Node now, and it's always, I think it's events. Okay, and let me just console log it. We're going to see here, event emitter dot, well, I spelled the events wrong, so that's not going to help. Okay, event emitter dot, there we go. Okay, dot, and there's a class. So I really don't want to import it this way. Ideally, what I want to do is, I'll do this, event emitter. There we go. And the reason is because when I did it without the curly brackets, it takes the whole library, the whole object with everything that the library offers, and saves it in the an object in the variable event emitter. I don't want that. I just want the one thing inside the library that's called event emitter. So when I use a curly brackets, I can pull out a thing by its exact name and save it in its own variable. Okay, cool. So that's why I did that, the different ways of like importing things. I'm technically using destructuring. That's all it is. Okay. Cool. So basically what you do is you create a new event emitter object. So const emitter equals new event emitter. Okay, and that's that. Now you have a new event emitter. Okay, now the event emitter can do two things. I can register an event with it. So I can sit there and say emitter.on, and then I can put literally any string I want. We'll say on cheese console.log console.log cheese happened. Okay, and then I would just trigger the event by doing emitter dot emit. And then when you do emit, you just emit one. You can emit the function, so cheese. Okay, and then let's just see if that works. So I'll open up my terminal, because again, this is Node, so that runs in the terminal, not in the browser. So I do node index.js, node index.js, and see cheese happened, because what happens is that this event gets registered. So there's like an array that says, okay, hey, this is the name of the event, this is the function that runs if this event is emitted. So then what happens is that when this happens, it goes through its array of functions or events that have been registered with it and sees, hey, is there any functions for a cheese event? Oh, yeah, there's this one. Okay, let's run that. So it's a little bit different, again, because you don't have DOM nodes. It's just, you just have certain things you want triggered at certain times. So you can emit an event and then have things registered to run when that event is emitted. But another cool thing you can do is you can actually, there isn't like a built-in event object because you don't have all the details you need that have to be shipped with the event object in the browser. Again, you're not dealing with a browser window here. But you can ship data, okay? So I can sit there and say, hey, cheese equals Gouda as a second argument when I emit the event. Okay? And what I will do is I will just pass in data. And let me console log data and see what we get. Okay, so basically anything that's passed in is like the second argument. I'm pretty sure that the event should receive. And see, it receives it. Okay, so I can pass data via the event, and the event will receive it. Okay, do you have to? Not necessarily. If you're just trying to trigger a function, you don't need to pass this in. But for example, in Mongoose, just because that's I think the simplest example, there's an error event. Now, when the error event is emitted, it actually passes you the error as a piece of data that you can use in your function. Okay, and so technically that's how that would work. And that's it. That's pretty much how the event emitter works in Node. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, I'm sure it has other things it can do. Like, let's take a look. Emit on, yeah, I guess those are the two main functions. It has some other functions. Like, I guess you can get the count of listeners. You can get a list of names. Like, let's try some of these things out. Dot event names. Let's try that out. Let's console.log that. It's also console.log emitter dot listener count. So I would assume this is just going to be an array of every event that has a listener attached to it, and then this would be the number of listeners, meaning the number of times I did a dot on this particular emitter. So let's see here, is that correct? No, they're functions. So let's try them out. Function. Okay, yep. So it's an array of the different events and the count. So it says 0 though. Okay, 0. Why would the listener count be 0? Unless it's basically just giving me sort of like the furthest index. Let me see if I add 2 of these. So I do this and I basically register 2 events responding to cheese. So we should see cheese Gouda print twice now, which it does, and it still says 0. Interesting. I'll have to figure out what this listener count function is doing. Okay. Now let's see here. If I run it before the event is emitted, does that make a difference? Nope. Okay, so yeah, I'm not quite sure what that property does, but there's other stuff going on in the event emitter library that you could play with. Now, the last thing I want to do is kind of show you guys like how you can create your own, like if you wanted to create your own custom like event emitter object. Not that you need to. Again, you have ways to create custom events, and then there's already a lot of libraries. I just released one, Merced events, for doing custom events. But just to show you how you would. Okay, custom.js. Okay, so and this will help you understand sort of like how events work under the hood. So class, we'll call it eventer. Okay, We'll define a class, and then we're just going to give it a property called events. We'll just say events equals an empty array. So the idea is that every potential listener is registered and gets stored in this array. Actually, I want to make it an object. Okay, I found the object an easier way to do this. No, let's do the array. Let's do the array. I think that might be a little bit more simpler for this particular example. So now what I want to do is I want to be able to add event listeners into that array. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to create a method called on, and on is going to get a string that is the event and take in a function. Okay, well, we can't use the word function. Let's call it a callback. Don't call it a comeback. Okay. Now, every time you run this function, what it does is just going to take the events array, events, this.events dot push, and it's just going to push an object that has the event and the callback. Okay, that's it. That's all it's going to do. Is just push those two things as a pair into the array. That's it. Then, if we decide to emit an event, and I'm not going to even bother with the data piece, just have the event emitted, what it'll do, it'll loop through the array. So it'll for event of events. So it's just going to loop through that array, and it's just going to see like if. Oh wait, let's just do for e of events because I technically already have event defined here, so I need that to stay existing. So if event, the event that's passed into the emit function, equals e dot event, okay, the property from the array, then we'll run the callback. Then e dot callback is invoked. Otherwise, do nothing. Okay, and then that's literally it right there. You've just kind of made the most basic of event emitter object. Like that's even simpler. Okay, and then basically how that, just to show that works, we would just say emitter const emitter equals new eventer. Okay, and then we would say emitter.on cheese. And then the call function console.log console.log Gouda, and then we'll just say emitter.emit cheese. Okay. Let's see. Oh, that's the wrong file. Node custom.js. Oh, we got an error, so let's see what that is. Events is not defined. Oh, I see why this is supposed to be this.events. Always forget the this. Ooh, classes. Okay. Oh. E is not defined. For E of this.events. Why wouldn't that be defined? For E of E for E of that's strange. So let me just do this. Const events equals this.events. Okay, and then change this back to E of events. Made the E, the this keyword was just kind of confusing it. So for every E of events, that still doesn't like it. Let's see here. E is not defined. Why? Well, what if I do let E? Will it stop complaining? Yep, that's what I wanted. I wanted a let. Okay, and see, it works. The event gets triggered. So the cheese event got emitted, and then the function that was attached to that, okay, like this is as simple as it gets. There's more efficient ways to do this because again, if you register a lot of events, that's a big array to be. It can become a big array to loop over. But I think this kind of makes the conceptual idea clear as possible. So hopefully now you are a master of event-driven programming, or at least now like you have a much deeper understanding of sort of what's going on. Again, basically, essentially, a function is run that says this string, this is the event that occurred, and then it's checking. So in the browser, there's generally like a property code like on click, like just to show that one more time. Like if I go here and I want to console log the button, so console.dir button. Okay, so if I go back to the browser one more time, you can see that there's these events listeners. So if I see right here, on click, on no, close. So when the event gets emitted, it's actually checking to see, hey, is there a function in the on click property? Okay, that's actually another way you can assign event. Like I could actually do this, button dot on click equals, and then put in a function, and that'd be the same thing as me doing this whole add event listener thing. Okay, so all add event listener is doing is just finding the right property and adding this function to it. That's literally all it's doing. Okay, although this begs the question: are you only allowed one event, one of each event per node? That's something for me to experiment with later. But you can see right there, see like it added that arrow function. Okay, so yeah, that's events. And then again in the browser, I mean in Node, the difference is it's all within one object, and one object is kind of tracking all the listeners and then checking the events that get emitted against all those listeners. And then you saw how we kind of built that out from scratch in that last class. So have a great day. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Do join the Slack and Discord community over there at devnursery.com. Follow me on Twitter. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. All that good stuff. Have a great day and enjoy.